Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today's wine is taking us to Stellenbosch, South Africa, and we're looking at the Rainbow's End 2018 Cabernet Franc. The story of Rainbow's End begins in 1978 when a property in the southern end of the Banghoek Valley was purchased by Jacques Mellan. They began planting vines in 2000 and 2001, and today the estate has around 22 hectares of vines, and Jacques has been since joined by his two sons, Anton and François. They have around 2.6 hectares of Cabernet Franc vines planted, and this grape has been a focus of the winery since the very beginning, with their first single varietal bottling back in 2005. Today, the winery makes 3 examples of Cabernet Franc, 2 reds, of which today's wine is one of them, as well as a Cabernet Franc rosé. So as I said, today's wine is taking us to Stellenbosch, the most historic wine region in South Africa. And this wine district is actually relatively large, representing around 16.5% of all vines planted in the country, making it the #1 region for hectares under vine in South Africa. The macroclimate of the region can be characterized as Mediterranean, and there are moderating influences that come from 3 key elements. We have these cool breezes that come in off of False Bay, altitude, as well as vineyard aspect. And while the district of Stellenbosch is actually only just over 20 kilometers wide, there is a lot of diversity in terms of the mesoclimates and soils from one end of the region to the other. And that has led to the subdivision of the Stellenbosch district into 7 distinct wine wards as part of the wine of origin system in South Africa. And each of these wards has their own unique climate, topographies, as well as soils. Generally speaking, the wards that are in the western part of Stellenbosch, such as Pokatrai Hills, these wards will receive the strongest moderating influence and cooling influence from the breezes that are coming in from the southeast off of False Bay. And this is really the main moderating influence in these particular wards. And then as we move east, this cooling influence becomes a little bit less pronounced, the temperatures are a little bit warmer, and the wards that are in the center of the Stellenbosch district tend to be the warmest. Now, today's wine and where Rainbow's End is located and their vineyards, we are in Banghoek, and this is a ward that is the furthest east in the Stellenbosch district. And actually, it was Jacques Mellan who was the person that initiated the process to establish Banghoek as its own wine ward back in 2005. And while this region is relatively young, the vines really have only been planted here in the last 20 years. Based on my research, I have a hunch that this is an exciting emerging region for Cabernet Franc in South Africa. And there have been a number of wines that have received accolades, both locally as well as internationally, like this wine from Rainbow's End. As well, there are several wineries that are putting a greater emphasis on Cabernet Franc as a key variety within their wine range. So let me articulate a little bit where Banghoek is and a little bit about the growing conditions here in this region. So Banghoek is located about 4 kilometers east of the town of Stellenbosch, and the region follows the Banghoek River Valley about 5 kilometers from north to south. And the region is surrounded by 3 major mountain ranges, and these have a bit of an impact on the climate that we find here. So we have the Siemensberg Mountains, which are just to the north of Banghoek. We have the Jonkershoek Mountains, which are to the southwest, and then we have the Drakensberg Mountains, which are to the southeast. And these mountains play several key roles in the growing environment here. First of all, they create vineyards at a higher elevation, so around 400 to 500 meters above sea level. And because of this elevation, we have a cooler growing environment, but we also have a wide diurnal range in temperatures. So the warm daytime temperatures are offset by cooler nighttime temperatures. And this, of course, is important for slowing down ripening, preserving acidities, extending the growing season as well. These mountains also cast vital shadows over the vineyards during key points in the day, and this is important for providing essential shading to the vines and bunches from the stronger sunshine. Finally, these mountains help to funnel in the cool breezes from the southeast, as well as the drier breezes that are coming in from the north, and these breezes are known as the berg winds. And these breezes help to moderate conditions, and they also help to eliminate moisture from the vineyards, and this will help to reduce disease pressure. And indeed, this region is a little bit more wet than we would typically expect in South Africa. The region receives relatively high amount of rainfall, upwards to 1,000 millimeters of rainfall per year, making it one of the wettest wards in the Stellenbosch district. And for Cabernet Franc, this is actually not a problem because Cabernet Franc is not a drought-tolerant grape variety. It needs a certain degree of moisture delivered to the vine regularly throughout the growing season in order to maintain a good vine balance. And this is really important for helping to minimize the pyrazines. And then in terms of soils in this area, generally, there are three broad groups of soils that we find in South Africa. We have soils that are derived from Table Mountain sandstone, soils that are derived from granite, and then soils that are derived from shale. And the soils that are derived from granite, and there are many subgroupings of these granitic soils, these soils will generally have a very good balance between moisture retention capacity as well as drainage. So we have cooling temperatures here from altitude. We have a wide diurnal range in temperatures, which helps to slow down ripening, extend the growing season, allowing for greater phenolic maturity of the grapes without excessive sugar accumulation. We also have a good amount of rainfall. We have moisture retentive soils. And while I have not visited this region, or tasted really too many wines from here, from what I can tell based on these elements, it feels like this is probably a really happy place for Cabernet Franc. So let's drill down even further to today's wine and the vineyards and where exactly we are in Banghoek. So we are at the far south end of the Banghoek River Valley, and we're on north-facing slopes in the foothills of the Jonkershoek Mountains. And for this wine, there are two blocks in terms of the vineyards, and these blocks total around 1.34 hectares of Cabernet Franc vines. And the vines were planted in 2001, and they're working with two clones. We have clone 1, which is a South African clone, and then clone 214, which is the Loire clone. And the vineyards are on these steep north and northeast facing slopes. And we have to remember that this gives the vines full sun exposure all year round, because in the Southern Hemisphere, it is the north-facing slopes that face the equator and give us that advantage in terms of sun exposure, which is good for Cabernet Franc, again, to help minimize the pyrazines. And then in terms of elevation, we are around 450 to 550 meters above sea level. So we have cooling conditions here. We also have the benefit of the wide diurnal range in temperatures, which will help to slow down ripening, extend the growing season. And actually, this site is one of the latest ripening sites for Cabernet Franc in the Stellenbosch district. Finally, in terms of soils, we are dealing with these granitic-based soils that we find throughout the Banghoek ward. And specifically here in this block, we are dealing with a type of soil called red oak leaf. And this is a sandy clay loam soil that has a good balance between moisture retention capacity as well as drainage. So from a winemaking perspective, what do we need to know about this wine? The fruit is hand harvested, it is hand sorted, the grapes are destemmed but not crushed, and they do a cold soak on the berries, about 3 days of a cold soak before the alcoholic fermentation kicks off. And the fermentation takes place in open top tanks, and they use selected yeast, and the fermentation temperature hovers around 25 to 28 degrees Celsius. And during the active fermentation, actually the first third of active fermentation, they will do some regular punch downs on the cap as well. Once that first third is over, they will switch to pump overs and do that until the wine has fermented dry. And then the wine stays on skins for a total of about 35 days. The wine is then drained off the skins are pressed in a manual basket press, and then the wine is aged for about 12 months or so in 225 liter French oak barrels, 30% of which is new. And one final point about this region before I tuck into this wine. The name Banghoek translates from Afrikaans into scary corner. And I can imagine the early settlers that came to this region when they traversed the mountain pass and entered this uninhabited area with these large brooding mountain ranges and plenty of predators like jaguars and lions and elephants and things like this. And I can feel the bravery, the courage that they would have had to come to this land that was not yet explored, that was not yet inhabited, but they wanted to create a life for themselves there. And I think there's a great story and parallel that can be drawn to the pioneering viticulturalists and winemakers that came to Banghoek to establish their vineyards here long before there was vines here. This is really only in the last 20 or so years. And these people could have easily established vineyards in other regions, more established regions in Stellenbosch, but they chose to come here because they saw some potential. They saw this opportunity to create something really special, to plant vines and make wines that really speak to a sense of place. So with that said, let's get into the wine. This wine has the most alluring perfume, and it's this combination of herbal undertones and fruits that make it really, really quite sexy. So I'm getting a combination of some red fruits, but mostly darker fruits. There's some red cherry here. There's a bit of a black raspberry, a touch of plum as well. The florals on this wine are just stunning. It's a mix of like rose, there's some sandalwood here. There's even some white flowers. And then these herbal elements come in, which are gorgeous. I'm getting a mix of herbs, like woodsy herbs like rosemary, maybe even oregano. And then there's that garrigue thing that we say, or like Mediterranean shrubbery that comes into play here, which is really quite pretty. And there's also a little bit of a spice element on the nose, a touch of cinnamon, and then there is a little bit of like a smoky note, I think, from the oak, but it's very dialed back. It's by no means overt. It's really nicely integrated with the fruit here. So on the palate, those same plusher fruits come through really nicely, and I should say as well, the fruits are really pure here. And while you do notice that it is coming from a warmer microclimate, the fruits are really fresh. They are just a beautiful stage of ripeness, I think. And I do get a little bit more of a black currant thing on the palate, which is really, really nice. Those herbal elements come through, and it's really beautiful. And the spice note is really lovely as well. I'm getting that cinnamon. There's a bit of star anise here as well, but lots of stuff going on, and you can feel that this wine has really nice concentration, and that this wine can go the distance as far as aging, and that it's really going to get even more interesting with a little bit of time in the bottle. Acidity is really quite fresh, mouth-watering, and the tannins I really like because they're gorgeously silky. There's, a ripe, round feeling to the tannins, and they're beautifully managed here and have a nice velvety tug. There's good structure here between the freshness of the acidity, the weight of the wine, and then these really beautiful silky tannins as well. And I think the wine is really nicely integrated in terms of the oak, and it's just beautifully in balance. This wine is just really lovely. It's got about a medium weight. There's some density here. There's an interesting kind of lower reverberation about this wine. Sometimes I talk about wines that are a bit more high-toned and pitchy. This wine kind of hovers lower. It's got this more of a baritone bass note thing going on, which I think is really, really lovely. And that gives it this sense of power and intensity and boldness, but at the same time we have all these herbal elements, these florals, the acidity that kind of help to pull the wine up and give this sense of levity and finesse and elegance. And really it's just such a lovely wine, and it's my first introduction to Rainbow's End, and I have to say this was a tasty one. If you've had a Cabernet Franc from Stellenbosch or anywhere else in South Africa that you absolutely love, do let me know who the producer is, what the wine was, in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.